I want to be brief, but I want to make a couple of points in closing. First of all, I am told that the Prime Minister of Montenegro, Milo Đukanović, is here. If he is, would you stand up so we can say hello? He came. I saw him when he was here earlier. But I also want to thank my great friend, the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, Dr. Denzil Douglas, for being here. Come here. Now, for all of you starting out on your commitments, this man caused me a lot of trouble. I paid more attention to the Caribbean and Central America than any American president had in decades. So I leave office, and in 2002, Nelson Mandela and I were invited to close the AIDS conference, the International AIDS Conference in Barcelona. And all we were doing, there was no money then. There was no Global Fund. There was no PEPFAR. There was no money for AIDS. And Mandela and I pretended that we were statesmen, and all we were doing was going around rattling a cup for people who were still in office, begging for money. Meanwhile, I had to build a library, and we had like 10 employees in the foundation or something, no, as compared with 1,300 today. So Denzil comes up to me and says what I already know, that the Caribbean had the second fastest growing rates of AIDS in the world then, that he was in charge of dealing with this because he was a doctor. And he looked at me after Mandela and I had, given all of our high-flown rhetoric, and he said, look, Bill, he said, we don't have a denial problem. We don't have a stigma problem. We have a money problem and an organization problem. And I said, Denzil, what do you want me to do about it? And he looked at me and said, I want you to fix it. Right?
That's correct.
And like a fool, I said, okay. It was my CGI moment. I had no idea what we were going to do. Okay, fast forward. Now we're providing drugs to people, the least expensive drugs, ARV drugs, in 70 countries. More than 5 million people get medicine off our contracts. Thanks to the French airline tax and a program called Unitaid, our foundation is able to provide life-saving medicine to 75% of the children on Earth that are kept alive by AIDS medicine. All because of this crazy conversation I had with an old friend that I just ran into. That's what I hope happens to all of you. I had no earthly idea that all the things that have unfolded in the last 11 years would happen, but I am profoundly grateful for it, and I owe it all to him. So give him a hand, would you?
Thank you. I want to thank President Clinton for really bringing life to several thousands of people in the Caribbean, assisted us in creating the Pan-Caribbean Partnership in the fight against HIV/AIDS, bringing relief in terms of the antiretroviral drugs, which were unavailable and unaffordable. Today, we can speak of universal access to the antiretrovirals and fighting magnanimously to end discrimination and stigmatization of those who are living with HIV/AIDS. Thank you.
I wanted him to come up here not only because he's a sort of hero of mine. He served and then he quit and he could be doing something else and making a lot of money, and he came back and served again. And we virtually ended the transmission of AIDS from mothers to children in the Caribbean. The death rate is down more than 80%. The hospitalization rate is down more than 80%. And a lot of the credit goes to him. And we can do that everywhere in the world. And because a lot of you can have moments like that. You just never know when you go up and you meet somebody and you start talking about something, what will happen next. So first, I want to thank a few people, and I'll be brief. I want to thank Hillary and Chelsea for coming into this foundation and finally giving me a chance to work with them. I learn something every day. I want to thank them for setting an example that Washington should follow. I mean, here they are, my wife and daughter, hardened Democrats, helping to save the symbol of the Republican Party in Africa, the elephant. And before they shut the government down, they should give them some money to save the elephants. Alas, our symbol, the poor donkey, needs no saving. Its entire value consists in its constant service to humanity without any ivory. I can't believe I did that. But I was serious about asking for help. I want to thank our sponsors. I want you to understand the whole CGI model doesn't work without the sponsors. Think about it. Even we would have to charge more to come without the sponsors, and we wouldn't be able to bring people here who cannot and morally should not pay, but without them, it wouldn't be CGI. What made CGI for you? They did, right? The Mexican kids playing like they'd been doing it for 50 years. All the young people. Our friend here from Sierra Leone tutoring the people at MIT. So all the sponsors made that possible, and I'd like you to give them a round of applause. I'm very grateful to them. I want to thank all of our volunteers, some of whom I will meet for the first time today, some of whom I've known since I started running for president, who just show up here every year to help us. I want to thank all of you who come and make commitments. And I want to thank Bob Harrison and the full-time people at CGI. And I'd like for Bob and anybody here who works for CGI full-time, I'd like to ask you to stand if you're here. And thank you. So, you have no idea the time and thought and research they spend trying to decide what every year's topic's going to be, but working year-round to help people develop commitments and then to help them keep those commitments. The thing that made this catch on was when we started that we weren't going to have another meeting where people just talked. They had to actually commit to do something. But it's harder than it sounds to commit to do something and then keep your commitment. You know, it's not always easy. And people even who mean well, even people who have the money to do it, sometimes can't figure out how to do it. So every year we spend more time trying to showcase progress reports. That's what the orchestra was. It was a progress report on a commitment made a couple of years ago. And we try to do that and to encourage people, and they spend more time every year trying to help people keep those commitments. And one of the reasons we got into this mobilizing for impact and before designing for impact is we thought we could help people through the way they did these projects in the first place to increase the likelihood that they would actually succeed. So I thank them. You saw, Chelsea told you we're going to have our 7th CGI University meeting, and you heard our young graduate of Rice, a long way from Nicaragua being torn apart by the Contras, the road she has traveled. Talk about that at Arizona State University in Tempe outside Phoenix. This December, we will have our 2nd CGI outside the United States, this one focusing on Latin America and being held in Rio de Janeiro. And then Next spring, we will have our 4th CGI meeting focused on America, its economy, and its social challenges, this one in Denver. So, and then next year, when we come back here, it will be our 10th annual meeting, and we'll have a good time. I want to beg your indulgence just for a couple more minutes while I say that not very long ago, just a few weeks ago, a good friend of mine took ill suddenly and passed away, the great Irish Nobel Prize-winning poet Seamus Heaney. In 1995, when we went to Northern Ireland and then to Dublin to celebrate the Irish ceasefire, ending the violence in the long Civil War, and beginning a peace process that led to a successful ratification of the so-called Good Friday Accord in 1998. I spoke to the town square full in Derry, the most Catholic town in Northern Ireland, but also the place where there was the most support for the peace process. And I quoted one of Seamus Heaney's poems, a long-tone poem called The Cure at Troy, written like the old Sophoclean plays. And there's a great line in here, which we are all a part of, that I quoted there. History says, don't hope on this side of the grave. But then once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. Every one of you is trying to compose a life in which hope and history rhyme. That's why you're here. When you get the Nobel Prize, they make you give a speech. And if you get it in a literary area, they expect a pretty lengthy lecture. Seamus's Nobel Prize-winning speech was quite wonderful, but he talked about the legend of St. Kevin, an Irish monk who was kneeling in prayer one day in a tiny little cell. And the cell was so small that when he reached his hand out to God, it went through the window. And when his hand went through the window, some kind of bird swooped down on it and planted a nest there and laid eggs. And he was so devoted to the premise that he had to serve, he wouldn't bring his hand in from the window until the eggs had hatched, according to the Irish legend. And in a way, we all make decisions like that in doing this kind of work. You may just reach your hand out and hit a home run. You may reach your hand out and find out that you're holding a nest with eggs in it, and you have no idea how long you're going to have to hold it till the eggs hatch. But your life is a rebuke to the examples of destruction which dominate the headlines. You don't have to win the headline race. All you have to win is the trend line race. I used to tell everybody who worked for me when we were in politics, there's a great deal of difference in the development of the human race between the headlines and the trend lines. You can win all the headlines, but if you're on the short side of the trend lines, then everything you dream of will come to nothing. You can lose years of headlines, but if building people up and bringing people together is the long-term trend line, you win in the end. And the headlines don't amount to a hill of beans. I'm telling you that because when we started this, you were kind enough to indulge me in a moment of honoring the young Dutch nurse, Elif Yavuz, who, along with her partner and her about-to-be-born baby, she was 8.5 months pregnant, were killed in that mall in Kenya. And I said she, to me, was the model of what a 21st century citizen ought to be. Here's another example of a totally unscripted CGI moment. 2 nights ago, I was going from an event for Procter & Gamble to an event for Coke. And on the way out, a woman I did not know and do not know, she may even be here today. I was so overwhelmed by what she told me that I literally lost track of who I was, where I was, and I didn't even get her name. But this lady, who was obviously a few years younger than me, but still a grown lady, came up to me in a very dignified way and thanked me for telling the story of Elif Yavuz. She said, 28 years ago, I was that woman. I said, what do you mean? She said, I was working in Somalia, an American in Somalia, and time came for me to give birth. So I went to Nairobi, to Kenya. It then was the best place to have a baby. Unlike her, nobody shot me, and I gave birth to a healthy boy. She said, but 21 years later, that healthy boy was a student at Virginia Tech. When a person went crazy and started shooting people, he shot my son 4 times. And then she said, again, by the grace of God, my son lived and recovered. And it changed his entire life, and he devotes his life now to doing this kind of work. And I could tell she said, I just been thinking, I was that woman. Why did I live? And why did my son later, though threatened, live? You never know. You have to live with what Hillary always calls the discipline of gratitude. That it is a gift we have been given. It's not for us to say when we go and how long we stay. But what we do depends on how we think, which is why the most important thing the bishop said was that everybody, each in their own way, has to let go of the darkest yesterdays. So I ask you to think about that. I wish I'd gotten that lady's name. I'll never forget the encounter, but she gave me a gift by acknowledging that not once but twice she escaped a fate that befell someone else. And the only thing she could do about it, and the only thing her son could do about it, was to resolve to live a more meaningful life. That is what we have. That is the ultimate rebuke to what happened in that mall. And that is the ultimate reason that I believe the trend lines will swallow the headlines. Thank you, and God bless you.